Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? We begin with the amazing gift that keeps on giving, GOOP. Gwyneth Paltrow's pet project has made one of the more amazing claims of recent years. They deny the existence of the coronavirus. According to their pet expert, Kelly Brogan, a holistic psychiatrist, it's not a real disease, and in fact, what's happening is all due to fear. Their degree in holistic psychiatry must have included a great deal of expertise in virology, microbiology, immunology, and other medical practices that aren't part of psychiatry. Unless that's the case, their claims don't stand on much merit, and their position is significantly undermined by public admissions that they don't believe in germ-based contagion, which everyone else knows as germ theory. This is something that was proven by Louis Pasteur over a century ago and has only ever been reinforced since. Of course, that can't be the end of it. It never is with GOOP. They don't just make the one mistake, they keep digging their hole all the way down. In this case, not only do they say that they would quite happily share utensils, cups, and similar with children who were infected, because it's not going to infect them. Further to that rather bizarre claim of special immunity, they suggest that their viewers, readers, and similar consider other narratives, as they call it. This seems to be the new way of describing alternative facts. The fact that neither of these is real concepts has obviously escaped them. Then it gets better. They claim that they believe the government is going to link passports with vaccination records, clearly channeling the spirit of Alex Jones, even though he's not dead yet. That in and of itself is impressive enough, but it's stupidity like that that's giving rise to the next news item, which is about a man who died after self-medicating with the chloroquine medication. We mentioned this last week. Chloroquine phosphate has possible use in this due to a very small scale, limited, and not particularly substantial clinical trial. It did show some positive results, but there's no real evidence to back it up beyond that. This man obviously heard about the news and has died, and his wife is in critical care in a hospital after they both ingested the chloroquine phosphate. They didn't use the medication version though. They used a product intended to clean aquarium fish tanks. Yeah. So they've used a product that wasn't intended to be used the way it was, that's based on a very early clinical trial that lacks substance, and have no idea what the dosing schedule, regime, side effects, or anything else could be if they had used it the way they did. Well, we know at least one of the consequences, and it's death. Another is you wind up in hospital. Perhaps they should have waited until there was at least some notion on what to do with this and how. A less questionable and unknown value has just been given approval when the FDA gave the go-ahead for a rapid test for the Wuhan Coronavirus. This can be done in about 45 minutes, and that's an important thing to consider. Similar tests have been used in South Korea, where you would go through a checkpoint, they would take a sample, you would go on your merry way, they would then process that sample, and a short time later, roughly 45 to 60 minutes, you would get a message telling you whether or not you had the disease and what action you would need to take. That is very important, as between testing and getting that message, you can limit the amount of harm you can cause by not interacting with others and similar sorts of actions. This new test the FDA has approved is important for that reason. It's the first in America with such a very short timeline, And that means, at least in theory, they could try and flatten the bell curve of the disease spreading by letting people know if they have the disease. What might have taken 3 days to 2 weeks previously can now be done in less than an hour. This is all part of an increasing effort to try and address the problem as quickly and as effectively as possible. Of course, it's not just this company that's received approval. 2 others have also received it. This includes Roche and Thermo Fisher. Now, the important part to take away from all of this is that the approval has not been done in the usual manner. Normally, something like this would take years, clinical trials, and a lot of other work to get through. However, the FDA's turned around and said, this is a pandemic. It's a situation in which we have limited tools to get it dealt with. We are going to approve this as an emergency measure. Now, that would also mean that they've stepped above and beyond the standard approvals. Something like this would normally require training and only be conducted in hospitals. What they've said is due to the nature of the equipment involved, how it's done, and the current situation. Any care setting can use this test because of how idiot-proof it is. At least in theory, if you can tell your patient in under an hour they don't have the Wuhan Coronavirus, you can start sending people home a lot sooner, and you can alleviate their personal stress. The reason you want to be able to send people home very quickly, very effectively, is in order to protect the medical staff who could act as a very efficient vector for spread of the disease. This is a big reason why several major clinical trials are underway on how to vaccinate healthcare workers, and at least one is being rolled out in Melbourne, Australia. This is a trial using an existing medication for tuberculosis. About 4,000 medical workers are being given the vaccine in an effort to see whether or not it would work in helping to knock down the Wuhan coronavirus's spread. The way it works is by ramping up the immune system. Specifically, it increases the efficacy of the innate immune system. By ramping up the efficiency of this part of the body's defenses, it can at least limit the spread of the disease and help someone fight it off quicker and more effectively. It's similar in a manner of speaking to the serum therapy we mentioned last week. Of course, Australia is not the only country to be running these sorts of tests and clinical trials, with Germany, the Netherlands, and UK providing similar programs for their medical staff in an hope to find something that will work. This becomes more important when you consider a recent article coming out of UCLA and published in the New England Journal of Medicine. It looked at the possible times that the Wuhan coronavirus could remain on surfaces. Importantly, they did look at surfaces that would commonly occur in a hospital. This includes what would be aerosols from coughing, sneezing, and general bodily fluids, through to steel and plastic. They found that an aerosol could last up to 3 hours. You could find the Wuhan coronavirus on copper for 4 hours, 24 hours on cardboard and similar, and between 2 and 3 days on plastic and steel. If you've been in a hospital, you would know that all of these materials are not just common, but they are practically universal. This means a hospital could act as an extremely efficient transmitter of the Wuhan coronavirus. Of course, being a very preliminary study, we can't rely on this as the sole answer as to what has happened. It remains important to be mindful of things like this when we look at the Wuhan coronavirus, and remember that it can hang around and it can have an effect even if we're not immediately mindful of it. This is why a statement made by a Catholic cardinal is not just stupid but dangerous. Cardinal Burke has said that the faithful should attend Mass despite restrictions that arise from the Wuhan Coronavirus. Not just that, but he says people should take part in the Catholic sacrament. In an online statement, he says that the relationship between an individual and God is essential to life. Apparently, he missed the lesson in school where life is essential to life, and dying due to an otherwise avoidable disease is an antithesis to this. You should not be surprised if you are familiar with the global heat map of the Wuhan coronavirus to find that Cardinal Burke is in fact an Italian. Italy has had one of the worst outbreaks of the disease, effectively surpassing that of China, officially anyway. This has led to 5,000 deaths and over 50,000 infections. The problem with what's being proposed is twofold. One, you are going to put a whole lot of people in a relatively confined space and expose them to each other that way. The second is the process of receiving the sacrament. Now, if you're going to go into a building and you are going to be given wine and crackers but no cheese, the least you would expect is not to be given a horrible disease in the process. However, going up and receiving the body and blood of Christ involves two things: someone distributing the crackers and someone allowing you to drink from a cup. That is a shared cup, and the person distributing the crackers generally makes some degree of contact with the people involved. Guess what happens when you share access to a cup and when you have constant contact with people? Infections and similar get passed around very quickly and very efficiently. As has just been said, the Wuhan coronavirus does hang around for quite a while. Stainless steel drinking vessels are not going to be of any help, and it's doubtful that the church is going to approve disposable plastic cups for the sacrament. The cardinal has heavily criticized the government for what he believed is a secular government pushing back against religion, trying to get in the way of people's participation. The fact that someone does not need to attend a special place at a special time in order to have a relationship with their personal imaginary friend seems to have escaped him. The fact that in doing so, they might avoid an unfortunate, untimely, and ultimately avoidable death has also escaped him. The jackass has gone so far as to suggest that priests should go out into the public and into the hospitals and minister to their members that way, which again does exactly the same thing as receiving the sacrament, creates carriers of disease that are otherwise avoidable. The reason that has been driven home so hard in this video relates to the next story, and it is how one Wuhan coronavirus case can lead to more than 59,000 further infections. Yes, that is 59,000 as a result of one individual getting the disease. That number may sound extreme and unrealistic until you start to look at how it compounds as more and more people get infected. To draw a comparison that's easily understood, influenza, as we know it, normally has a ratio of one person infected, infecting 1.4 more people. This means that there is always going to be a growth in it. That's understandable. But that also means that after 10 infections, you normally get 14 people infected. What you get in this case with coronavirus is a significantly higher figure, roughly 3 people infected for everyone with it. After 10 infections, that is, 10 times it's been passed on to successive generations, you get to 59,000. You start with 1, then you have 3 people infected, giving you 4. Then you get 3 by 4, which is 12. Then you get 16 by 3, and so on. Each time it basically grows to an exponential power. And after 10 successive generations of this, you have 59,000. If you were to take it to 11 generations, we're looking at 177,000. Considering just one individual, say a priest, picking up the Wuhan coronavirus in the process of ministering to their members, how many people could they pass it on to? This is no longer a 3-to-1 ratio, but significantly more. What if they were to affect the sacrament? Now you don't just have one person infecting many others, but possibly many infecting many. It's a crazy and ridiculous means of spreading a disease, and the Wuhan coronavirus in and of itself is incredibly infectious by comparison to similar diseases. This is why the Italian medical system is absolutely groaning under the weight of all of the patients it's having to deal with, why they are having to triage the elderly, and basically say, if you are over 60, you are shit out of luck, and you are going to have to find your own way to manage, which in reality is a death sentence. These are wartime conditions for Italy, and other countries may not be any better off if people don't start following basic self-isolation and containment procedures if they think they're sick, let alone anything else. That whole situation dovetails with what we're seeing in China. And no, not the outbreak of a second disease or a return of the Wuhan coronavirus, but the mass loss of mobile phone users in China. The official figures we are getting say that China's had no new cases. Of course, there are many problems with how China reports their figures, but what we can't question is data coming out about the mobile carriers' accounts. The 3 biggest telecommunication companies in China have lost a combined 21 million accounts. It's believed that this is riding directly on the coattails of the Wuhan coronavirus. Now yes, China is a large population, and 21 million accounts isn't necessarily a large figure, until you allow for the fact that China, like a lot of Asian countries, relies heavily on their phones. This many account closures is unusual, and it is strongly suspected that it is associated with the unknown number of infections, and as a result, unknown number of deaths that China is not reporting on. Of course, we will have a better understanding of what is actually happening over the next few weeks. If it is just due to seasonal or migrant workers closing their account while they return home, it is possible, now that many regions are reopening factories and similar, that we will see an increase again in account holders. If we don't, it'll be a good sign that they're either no longer alive or they're not returning to where they came from. The rather large subscriber drop could also be a product of the totalitarian measures China has taken to restrain the movement of people and therefore the spread of the disease. This neatly dovetails with the next piece of news, which regards the number of people under lockdown. Think about this for a second. There are more people currently under lockdown across the globe than there were alive during World War II. That is, in 80 years, our population has increased by such a large margin that more people are in lockdown than there were alive during the last global war. That is a war in which people had curfews, were forced to stay at home, and similar, particularly in the UK. Although some government measures have been rather totalitarian and dictatorial, others are surprisingly benevolent, and at least 2 countries, Australia and America, are trying to roll out what they call economic stimulus packages. Now, the US has been held up on this, and that's due to partisan issues in the 2 primary parties. They haven't been able to settle on just who, what, and how they are going to distribute funding. Australia, on the other hand, has released at least 3 sets of stimulus plans. One of these is a massive injection of cash into industries. The second one is intended for small business, and the third for welfare recipients. The third group being a direct product of the first two. As large and small companies have shut down, people have become unemployed and unable to pay for various bills and expenses, such as rent. Therefore, they've signed up to receive welfare. As a product of that, they simply can't manage from what they were once able to do, and the government agreed to not just temporarily increase welfare recipients' payments, but to give them small lump sum payments over the next few months. This makes a lot more sense when you look at the spending patterns of those who are on the bottom of the socio-economic pyramid. If you don't have money to invest in a bank account, then you are going to spend it on essentials. Toilet paper being one of the more expensive and difficult to obtain items at present, especially in Australia. For this reason, giving them a lump sum payment means they will go and spend money, putting it back into the economy, and that will help it continue to roll on. Then you need to account for the fact they're helping people to stay in their house, continue to be able to pay their bills, and continue to keep people employed in some capacity, especially in small businesses. Finally, we have a bit of news on how extreme America is taking it, if not financially, at least practically. New York has had to roll out the National Guard in order to deal with all the problems coming out of the Wuhan Coronavirus. This is not just ensuring people stay inside and well behaved, but to deal with the number of bodies piling up. More than 2,200 troops have been deployed and put on duty in New York. This could be things from toll booth type testing stations, all the way through to helping to dispose of corpses. New York has literally rolled out the National Guard, what would normally be used for disasters and war, in order to deal with this pandemic. That should give you some understanding of the scope of how bad it is getting in some places. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.